Okay, you'd have to do the first item, Emily.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Holly. Can I just confirm the convener, please? Councillor Chris Holly has confirmed he's happy to continue for the next year. Could I ask everyone if they're all in agreement with this, please?
I move.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And if I could also do a quick roll call, please. I'll start with panel members. Councillor Peter Black.
Here.
Councillor Chris Holly.
Here.
Councillor Linda James. Councillor Mary Jones.
Here.
Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yes, here.
Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
Yes.
Councillor Bridget Rowlands.
Present.
Councillor Philip Downing.
Present.
Councillor Peter Jones.
Present.
Councillor Des Thomas.
Yes, present.
Thank you. And the invited cabinet members and officers, Councillor Rob Stewart. Councillor Mark Thomas.
Present.
Ben Smith.
Present.
Chris Howell.
Present.
And Michelle Roberts. And we've had apologies from Irene Mann today. And I'll just hand you back to Councillor Holly. Thank you.
Sorry, Emily,
Thank you.
Adam Hill here as well.
Oh, Adam.
Oh, and Adam Hill, thank you. Is there anybody else here? I'm sorry that I've not called. Okay, thank you. Back to Councillor Holly, thank you.
Okay, thank you all. The next item on the agenda is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. Are there any? Members first?
No.
No, okay. Then officers? No. Okay, the fourth item on the agenda is the prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. I'll take that as read. Item 5 are the minutes of the previous meeting. And I'm assuming everybody has read them.
Yes, they're comprehensive.
All right. Everybody happy with that?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, okay. Then the next item is public questions. Are there any questions that have been submitted by the public, Emily or Michelle?
No questions submitted today, no.
Okay, thank you. Then we have a Q1 budget monitoring report. And I'm assuming that we asking Ben to do this.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief in terms of introductions. I will repeat, first of all, what I gave as advice to Cabinet, which is this tries to bridge the difficult gap between normal budget reporting for the first quarter, which is high level but granularity in terms of service spending, but also tries to capture the challenges that COVID thrusts upon us. In terms of briefly drawing your attention to the items in the report, the recommendations on page 6, 3 of them are normal. The recommendation number 3 is the unusual one and is as a result of COVID, which recommended in extremis to Cabinet was approved that up to £10 million be drawn from reserves, and that's consistent with the advice and the decision taken at Council recently earlier this month. If I draw your attention to the bottom of page 7, that overall Directorate summary makes very, very clear that the majority of the variation, albeit it is very, very substantial at over £30 million at the first quarter, is as a result of COVID in particular. Section 2.7, which is embarked on the next page, is a little bit clunky, if I'm honest, but it tries to set out the complex interaction of specific grants that we've been granted as a result of COVID, but the more complicated competitive bid process substantially in arrears with Welsh Government trying to claw monies back. If I draw your attention then to the Contingency Fund in Section 3, Contingency Fund would have been a relatively quiet affair at first quarter if it were not for COVID, and again consistent with the advice that I gave to Council and was agreed at Council, which is that the brought forward contingency fund sum from last year as a result of large underspend is also released to seek to minimise the collateral damage from COVID on the finances for the year. The rest of the report sets out in normal fashion the overall position for revenue. I'll draw your attention next to section 5, which is the capital budget. Two items to draw your attention to: the usual relatively low proportion of spend against the overall capital programme, but the particularly important one is the second column in, which is that the budget is as I referred to at Cabinet, a world record sum for Swansea in terms of the size of the capital programme for the year, combination of COVID spend on the field hospital, plus the very substantial city centre build, which is continuing unabated. Housing revenue account remains in section 6 relatively looking after itself, but again there are some concerns as the economy continues to likely deteriorate and people's ability to meet their rental costs. The rest of the report is in normal fashion and sets out, particularly in Appendix A, schematically the overall summary of the position, which I would describe as challenging, continues to be challenging, and it is likely to be a very unusual year in terms of ebb and flow when it comes to the second quarter and third quarter, but does confirm that the council is in a position that it will balance its budget for this year. I don't think I have anything else to add by way of introduction, and happy to hand over to yourselves if there are questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I see Councillor Jeff Jones has got his hand up, so I'll go to him first.
Yes, thanks. It's just a clarification, really, Ben. Back in the minutes for this meeting, I asked with regards to council tax arrears, which I think came out at 4.7 million. But on page 7 of this report, 2.2, it doesn't seem to come to 4.7. First question was, is the 4.7 million for this year? And really looking back at 2.2, the figures don't seem to come to 4.7 if they are cumulative. Just a point for clarification, really, please.
Yes, so by way of clarification, the question you asked me last time, Councillor, was the arrears at the end of last year, i.e. 1920. That was £4.7 million for 1920. There was a cumulative total of nearer £10 million if you took all council tax all the way back to year dot, because council tax is an unusual debt. Whilst it's no longer a capital debt, which results in the threat of imprisonment, we still have greater powers than most parties to be able to recover debts from people, so they remain open for a very long period of time. The items referred to in the report are in relation to 2021. It is an early indication that I am indicating that we are on course for a significant shortfall in council tax collection already in the current year. I think members will recall that I indicated previously that 2 years ago we racked up a £300,000 deficit on the collection fund. Last year, with just a week of COVID, £100,000. My current position is that at the first quarter I expect it to be at least about £2.5 million short in the current year. It's unusual for us to crystallise a position early doors. The reality is some people may choose to defer payment in year because they're under particular financial pressure. We don't normally firm up on a figure until the end of the year, but because of the scale of in-year shortfall and the likely deterioration to follow, I felt it appropriate, albeit with significant risks around the level of estimation, to draw Cabinet and ultimately Council's attention to the likelihood of a very substantial in-year collection fund loss. And again, for members' understanding, the media has often reported on a deal struck between SIPFA, my professional institute, and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, which allows for losses to be spread over the following 3 years. Unfortunately, that only applies to English authorities. One of the oddities of the Welsh legislation is that in-year collection fund deficits, once posted, are a charge to the in-year account. So we have no flexibility to spread the losses over the following 3 years.
Thanks very much.
Okay, Paxton, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I go to Appendix A for a minute, please, Ben? Which shows the projection, the revenue budget projection, basically. Because I'm a little bit confused again now, just for a change, but there we go, I guess. We're showing in terms at the top of the page there, in terms of place, a £16 million overspend. And I'm not at all sure why it would appear in place and what the reasons for that in place are, that's for sure. But basically, when you come down towards the bottom of the page with a total budget requirement, we're looking like we're going to be underspending by about 38 million. Now, that is somewhat contrary to what you were saying basically earlier, so I'm not quite sure where we are with that.
Mhm.
Or am I reading those figures wrong?
No, I think it shows the interesting vagaries of the year we have. If I start with the first question, which is around why place and why so big, the reality is places where an awful lot of our discretionary activity is undertaken. So with lockdown, people chose not to come into the city and pay to park. Car parking income is down.
Okay.
We are unusual compared to many authorities in Wales in that we own much more of the city centre, predominantly as a result of the rebuilding effort after the Second World War rather than any recent property acquisition. So we are the largest, probably the largest commercial landlord in the city centre, and some tenants are struggling to pay. And indeed, you've seen some reports through Cabinet where there have been some rental concessions granted by Cabinet on behalf of council. The other thing you have is, in similar vein, the leisure and cultural activities. Effectively, lockdown has wiped them out, both in terms of shortfall of income from footfall, but also a need to strategically support partners. And again, Cabinet has received some in-year reports around giving additional support to keep those venues solvent whilst in a state of suspended animation. So that's why place in particular is significantly affected by COVID. In terms of the bit down the bottom, no, you've not misread it. It shows one of the vagaries. Again, the second to last column shows that it balances. You've got a total requirement of 432.5 million, financed by 432.5 million. The reason that the end column shows a wild swing of 37.8 million pounds is as a result of the decisions by Welsh Government to change the arrangements in terms of business rates. You'll be aware that not only did we hand out 53 million pounds potentially of business grants in the first quarter, and we've just done a second slug in the second stroke third quarter. We were also granted additional funds to be able to expand the high street and small business rate relief to give 100% relief to businesses up to the 51k mark. That results in two things: a specific additional grant to us of 35 million pounds, and specific grants are accounted for above the line. But to ensure that we don't end up with a profit, because the business rates liability is effectively ultimately cancelled at source, there is then an enormous shortfall of non-domestic rates actually collected. And at the point at which we've then got an enormous shortfall on the amount of business rates likely to be collected, that flows through to an enormous shortfall on the national pool. And as a result of the enormous shortfall on the national pool, the Welsh Government has to reduce our block grant in AEF, and so it washes through. So what you end up with is a very odd situation where a very large amount of block grant at the stroke of a ministerial pen has been turned into a specific grant. Block grants are accounted for below the line, specific grants above the line. So it's a bit of a mirage. You end up with a figure being in one place and then another place, but the net effect is it's a 0-0 draw.
Paxton, I've told you before, it's the black art of a treasurer.
So at the end of the day, that 37 million underspend is going to disappear, is it?
It's not an underspend, to clarify. It's a variation of 37.7 million, of which 35 million is subscribed to non-domestic rates. So that end column is not an underspend figure. It is a variation from the original budget, and it's because the block grant, what is called AEF, Aggregate External Finance, which is a combination of the revenue support grant and non-domestic rates, has been reduced as a result of a decision by Welsh Government to substantially increase a new specific grant. It is one of the vagaries of local government finance. Block grants are always in a big bucket below the line. Specific grants are accounted for above the line. And whilst the two figures are the same, they do end up distorting it in terms of the variation reported. So you shouldn't be seeing that last column as a £37.7 million underspend. It's a variation from budget, because of that interaction between specific and block grants. Hugely confusing, but that's the way the accounting rules work, so I've got to account for it that way. I think we'll wait until we get to the year end. We think that's right because in discussions with Audit Wales, they've agreed that effectively we're acting as agent for Welsh Government on all of these business grants and business reliefs, and that therefore it should be washed through the account to be net neutral, but we'll all have to decide how to best account for it. And yeah, we're talking about sums that would ordinarily be £1 million here, £1 million there, where we've flexed the budget by over £100 million, more than 25% of the revenue budget. It does make it quite distorting, and one of the difficulties I have is to try and give you a set of reports that look like they normally look like, but that also paints sufficient of a tale and trail as to how COVID has impacted on the council's operations. I may have miserably failed in terms of the sheer scale of the distorting effect on the report, but I think it does paint at least the full picture for you. But I must emphasise that last column is not and should not be construed as a £37.7 million underspend. It is a deviation from the budget set in March because COVID has driven a coach and horses through it.
So presumably further up the line, the net revenue expenditure is not a £21 million underspend, but it does beg the question why we still need to be bringing 16 million down.
No, Pakistan, if I can help you for just 1 minute, if you look at that, you will see non-domestic rates, 85 million reduced to 50 million, and you'll see the 35 million, which is the block grant. Okay. Now, then if you go back up, you will see that that figure is added to the underspend, and that gives you the 37 million, the reduction figure. Is that on any help or not? No, I don't think it does it? There we are. It's a black art.
Good question, and an
well, we do understand it's a black art, Chairman. I got to say that, but I still try and understand the black art from now and then. It's always a fascinating process.
The problem, if you look at the variations on the very top, you've got 5.6, 2.8, 6.1, 16, and 1.9, 31. Then you add all the other figures together, comes to 37. Then you've got a block grant to 35, which is the difference between them. The difference is being the 35 from the grant, the block grant that the Welsh Government has given us. Okay, so it isn't a £37 million deficit. The deficit is more like the 16 that we've taken out of reserve. Is that any clearer, Ben?
That's along the right lines, Chair. I mean, again, to emphasise the above the line £31 million overspend is truly that level of overspend. I'm anticipating £30 million back from the Welsh Government in terms of specific grants, which reduces down the overspend. As you can see in that summary, there's a few central pots I've been able to rob out to get it down to that net £17 million left over. And that is the reason why there are then the recommendations around 2 draws from our own reserves, because we're not going to be fully recompensed for the full effect of COVID. I do accept, Councillor Paxton-Williams, it is complicated and very distorting. Who'd have thought it? COVID has been very, very distorting on the council and the council's finances, and I think it's quite clear for all to see in the complexities of the narrative and also that summary table. I've done my best to explain the dark arts. I think that Councillor Holly has surmised it pretty well, but it is the reason why there is still a need to draw potentially from reserves. I mean, the point I would make is, as I say, COVID is evolving, COVID financing and reimbursement from Welsh Government is evolving, and I think what you'll see is a real roller coaster this year. In second quarter, you should expect to see service overspend income down as you see grants being released, but as you see more spend. How the whole year will pan out, we wait and see. But at the moment, I am giving confident advice to Cabinet and Council that in any scenario for the year, I can find a way of balancing for this year. What happens thereafter will be a matter of debate, I'm sure, in due course when we come on to the other items on this agenda.
Okay. Peter, you've got your hand up, and Mary. So Peter first, then Mary.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You're making me feel sorry for auditors at the moment, so which is never a good thing. Just to clarify for my own sake, Ben, this is a quarter 1 report. So this is a snapshot basically at the end of June. And so there's been 4 months gone since this snapshot has taken place. Is that correct?
That is correct. It is a forecast for the year, but it is a snapshot. It is a snapshot of certainty of spending for April, May, June, and certainty of specific grant offers in terms of those business grants. What we have done is the reason we held it up a month in terms of the cycle was to give us some certainty over the £12 million worth of potential successful bids against the various Welsh Government reimbursement funds. So it's again an unusual one, Councillor Black. It's effectively a first quarter with a little bit of deliberate deferral to try and firm up on what we knew. To set it in context, I'm near the point of finalising the second quarter, which is obviously the end of September. But the reality is the reason I haven't finalised it is I need October and most of November just to be left open to see what I get from the second round of competitive bids at Welsh Government. So it's forcing me to go almost a month later than I would like to go in terms of normal cycle, but for a good reason, because in a quarter, £12 million worth of certainty on money, it was worth waiting a month. And so I'm planning to do the same again. It's where we've tried to keep things consistent for normal business, but flex it a little bit just to try and get that little bit greater certainty of what we're likely to get back. It's those competitive bids that are the particularly problematical bit. As Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams has made clear to this panel in the past, to some extent, the council is hugely reliant on those specific grants, but I don't always have the comfort of a specific grant offer for Swansea. I don't know what I'm going to get. Depends how plausible and successful my arguments are compared to 21 other authorities. So it does naturally slow the process down and increase the uncertainty over the figures that I quote.
Okay, well that goes to the nub of my question really, because effectively we've had 4 months. There's still uncertainties in this particular report, and I was just wondering, during that 4-month period, I'm looking at paragraph 4.1 here, have we had any certainty or any indication in those 4 months from the Welsh Government that they will cover the council tax shortfall, and that the £10 million overspend can be met from any other way than going into our reserves?
If I start with the council tax shortfall, we've not progressed with any certainty. Welsh Government officials have indicated that the Welsh Government is sympathetic to the position, but no more than that, which makes that the biggest, you're right to focus on it, makes it the biggest inherent uncertainty of all. At the moment, I would be staggered if there were not a council tax loss for the year. We managed a small loss for the previous 2 years, and that's why I've indicated, unusually, even at first quarter, I'm declaring a loss for the year. It's an unusual one and a difficult one. Council tax is the most local of taxes, and in ordinary circumstances, the losses should fall to the individual authority. It goes without saying there is a recognition that it's not exactly caused by local circumstances. If I were ministers, and I tread on slightly dangerous ground in terms of my hypothesising, clearly it's a matter for ministers to decide, but it's the one that I would be least likely to be looking to meet in full, because it is a local tax and it's local decisions. But I have zero certainty of any reimbursement. I have warm words. I'm not surprised that that's the Welsh Government's position at this stage. They've got to decide what sums of money they've got and prioritise reimbursement cases. So that to some extent drives an element of that anticipated £10 million draw from capital equalisation reserve. The degree to which we are successful or otherwise in all of the other pots will indeed impact upon it. At this point in time, I'm no more certain than I've got to assume a worst case scenario of a £10 million draw. If we are more than successful compared to others against those finite pots, and as more of those finite pots are released, I think, again, as I indicated at council in my medium-term budget statement, one of the things that causes me difficulty is keeping up with the daily announcements from UK Government and Welsh Government. And then there is a further complication for authorities in Wales, and an awful lot of things that are announced in the media are often England only. Yes, there then is a Barnet consequential to the Welsh Government, but it takes them a little while to work up their scheme, and they're not always necessarily exactly the same schemes. So again, given that there are inherent uncertainties over the total value of the quantum come as the year progresses, and the degree of success or otherwise compared to other authorities, because effectively you've got bids going in and they're being put into one of 3 categories. Yes, you can have a reimbursement in full because you've argued your case well. Some where there's absolutely an argument that no, that's local choice, you're not getting any of it back whatsoever. And those are the items that are likely to cause us to need to draw some money from reserves. And then you've got a middle range of items which are, oh, you're a little bit different from other authorities. I go back to the point I made about our substantial property holdings. Oh, you're a little bit different from other authorities. We'll put that to our technical panel to see whether it's reasonable, deserving or not. I have to say on that one, certainly for the first quarter, we were successful in terms of claiming for loss of property income, because it was recognised that our property holdings were a historical accident, or forefather foresight, shall I say, rather than anything more recent. So it will depend how it pans out for the year. As I indicated at council, I've got more uncertainties than certainties ever.
So is there any indication when the Welsh Government will be able to give us more certainty? Are they giving us any timescale or timetable?
Not really, Councillor Black. The reality is the claim at the end of September has gone in. We've had an early indication of the decision on the first tranche, which is now, what, second full week in November. I can expect another update in December and probably one in January. So it only gives me certainty over the second quarter at the end of, 2-3 months hence at the end of a quarter. And of course, we await further announcements of further allocations of sums of money. I am finding it, along with my fellow treasurers, incredibly difficult to keep track of all of the various announcements at both UK and Welsh Government level. Cardiff University are doing a tracker and keeping tabs on what monies have been allocated. There are still further sums to allocate. That's a choice for Welsh Government as to whether they go into the economy portfolio or which items come to local government. I think you're going to see all year inherent uncertainty. I think even when I come to the third quarter, which would be likely due to be timed at the same time when we're considering the budget, I still think there will be a number of inherent uncertainties because of that time lag of claims and the fact that it's a competitive process against all other authorities. I think it's going to be the year where I'm least certain, even as the year progresses, as to what the final number is likely to be. A far from ideal position, but we're no different from anyone else, Councillor Black.
Thanks, Ben.
Mary?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my questions are all around the recharging for anomalies for COVID. I haven't got page numbers on the device I'm using, but it's 2.7 when they're listed. And I know we have to only claim for certain items, and I know everything has to be audited. But it is a quite specific list that's here. And I'm wondering, are there any other things? I'm not talking about the field hospital under the capital. This is all like revenue, because I'm not sure about other authorities, but where you've had sickness, have you had to have agency staff in to cover, i.e., our refuse collection or in social care, because there doesn't seem to be anything listed. And also in a report coming for us later on, which is the I've forgotten the name of the report and I can't go back to it, but it's the landfill and recycling report. Our recycling services, because the recycling centres have been closed, we haven't been perhaps able to meet our target. I know we've done extremely well. Would we have penalties because we haven't met our recycling targets? And if so, would they be then obviously not? We wouldn't be, I can't think of the word I need, but they not hold it against us, for want of a better terminology.
On the first question, Councillor Jones, the items referred to are not meant to be exhaustive. There is an emerging list of things that are allowable and not allowable. The Welsh Government's starting presumption is if you can submit a claim for anything that you can reasonably evidence as having cost you money as a result of COVID, then you are entitled to put it in. The reality is the 22 local authorities, although they're in the same business, they do things differently. And so a number of the items get put on the in the middle, too difficult to decide in the first instance camp. So where they're trying to weigh up what's fair and reasonable, depending on whether the service is outsourced fully, kept in-house, and variations on the theme, that affects not only potentially refuse collection, but also the leisure facilities and a whole raft of others. So you shouldn't consider its absence as meaning it's not eligible. It's very much, if you can argue your case, they'll consider reimbursements. On the matter around landfill, etc., unless officers are better able to advise me, I think the Welsh Government has been silent on the position. So the reality is, don't forget, as with everything, there is no relaxation of any of the rules around any of our obligations. So if tonnage is down, as things stand at the moment, yes, we are exposed to action and penalties, but that's not to say that the Welsh Government won't consider relaxations in due course. I don't know if my waste colleagues on the call are able to answer any more fully than me, because it does stray into policy matters other than just the budget. But at the moment, I'm not aware of any announcements. I can see that there is an indication. So I'll pause there.
I got Chris Howells and Mark Thomas wish to answer you, Mary. So if we take Mark first and then go on to Chris, and then I'll come back to you, Mary. Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm sure Chris will come in with more detail on it, but yeah, my understanding, what Ben said is quite correct. the government hasn't announced any relaxation of rules. I understand that. I think if you just relax the rules, then maybe people won't stick to and be as rigid in trying to achieve the targets as possible. But they have issued, I think it's in my report to follow, actually. I'm trying to think of the exact words. I haven't got the report in front of me, but I think it's something along the lines of Welsh Government is very understanding of what local authorities have been through and will take that into account. So you can interpret that anyway. My interpretation is as long as you have, as long as you haven't gone ridiculously away from the targets or something like that. But it's difficult to give a general statement if the Welsh Government just said, we will not penalise local authorities for failing to meet the target. Well, if you're 20% short, you see what I mean? So I think there's going to be a measure of common sense. My expectation for our authority is that on the first instance, we are either going to meet our target for this year or just miss it. So I'm not fearful at all in having any fines being imposed on Swansea Council.
Okay, Chris Howells.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. To be honest, Mark covered it very well. The recycling targets are legislative, so they didn't want to change the legislation with regards to the targets because of COVID. At an officer level, they've indicated that they are sympathetic to all local authorities' position, and I guess you've got to read into that what you do. They said a similar thing last year when there was severe flooding, and a lot of authorities picked up a lot of extra waste through flooding. And again, the Welsh Government said that they would be sympathetic when looking at the recycling performance. So as Mark said, I certainly wouldn't expect us to, if we dip under 64%, which is kind of getting more likely, to have fines because of the COVID situation, even though they're not changing the legislation on the targets.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Mary, do you want to come back on any of those comments?
No, thanks. I understand that as long as they're sympathetic and we are able to, put our case, I'm happy with that. And the same when Ben, answered, the list wasn't exhaustive, but you would have expected something in there about cover for sickness for critical services when we can't actually, cover it ourselves because so many of our own staff are isolating or whatever they had to do. So you would have thought that was there. I mean, they put in about the meals for the homeless, and now we have to pick up the tab, but they didn't seem to address the big issues apart from obviously and things like that, which have been perhaps a bit of a difficulty for some authorities.
Okay, Jeff, I got you. Oh, sorry, Chris Howells. Do you want to come back on this, Chris?
Yeah, just on Mary's point around the finances within waste in particular. In terms of sickness, we didn't incur any additional costs, because through the main peak of the first peak of the pandemic, a lot of services were stopped. So, for example, things like grass cutting stopped, a lot of litter picking stopped because nobody's in the town centre. So we could backfill using the resources we have. Where we have picked up additional labour costs, so for example, we are providing some convoy vehicles for some of the crews to support them to give more flexibility on social distancing. Those costs are in there as a claim to Welsh Government.
Okay, right, Jeff Jones.
Yeah, thanks. Couple of clarification questions really. Again, on page 14, it's under the capital budget. The first paragraph there is actually on about impact of COVID will have on timing and potential slippage of capital programs. Is that this will have an impact on the revenue, capital financing charges and beyond? Is that a negative impact? And also another question, if I can actually, on the bottom of the page, the housing revenue account, it says it's not been adversely affected really. It's during Q1, but you expect it to get worse as time goes on. Why is it? Is it? Will it be as adverse as the council tax collection? And I've never seen any figures with regards to bad debts on the HRA collection. Sorry, is that clear enough for you?
It is, Councillor Jones. They're two separate questions, so I'll deal with the capital one first. I'll try to tone down my glee. As you know, I only look at the capital financing through one very, very narrow lens as a financier, and unequivocally delays in the capital programme are nothing but absolutely good news for me in terms of financing the capital programme. I will save on capital financing as a result and reduce the immediate impact on the revenue account. It's a short-term win. I mean, clearly, Cabinet members, Council and yourselves on scrutiny, you will see the other lens, which is there is then a delay in actually physically providing the capital works. But from my point of view, it is nothing but a positive. As you're aware, I'm trying to finance the longer term capital programme up to the peak of 25-26. And for a number of years, bits of slippage and bits of luck and being savvy on the financing has enabled me to underspend capital financing and therefore put that money in the first place into the capital equalisation reserve. In terms of the HRA, the risk is on the revenue side, and yes, there are always calculations done on the level of arrears of rents. They're not normally so material because a large number of tenants are in receipt of elements of benefits, and that does help to de-risk it to some extent. At the point of writing the first quarter, of course, we were expecting the furlough scheme to have ended and there to be a less generous job support scheme. The main narrative was around the overall economic position and individuals who may find themselves with substantially less income coming in, certainly for those where only part of the costs of rent were covered by benefits, and then a time lag between potentially people being eligible to be considered for benefits. You'll be aware that as part of the fast-moving situation, the furlough scheme has been extended, and that is likely to help the position. But I am still concerned that overall economic performance for the economy is not looking good, and where people lose their jobs, their means of being able to adjust to potentially living on benefits once that application has been processed is likely to increase the pressure on people's ability to pay. I'm trying to be deliberately guarded in my my answer because these are sort of national policy considerations, and in one sense not directly relevant to the report in front of you, but clearly they have an indirect relevance, because if the economy deteriorates significantly and there is large scale unemployment, these are ifs, and depending on how the national schemes go in terms of income support, either in work or what temporary arrangements are made in terms of plusages and additions to benefits in the short term, certainly in terms of some of those top-ups of universal credit, I think it only right that I had to flag that it's likely that the risks are to the downside. So the HRA, as you know, is self-contained and relatively looks after itself in terms of my reporting to you on an annual basis, but the risks are certainly increasing. I'll probably stop at that point because I'm trying to focus on the impact on the report in terms of the finances, but there are a large number of wider macroeconomic and social and policy considerations which would probably be appropriate for other committees and another time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else? Okay, if nobody else is, Ben, the thing is, this is a snapshot that at some period of time, because in all honesty, the situation is so fluid. You know, you could give us this report dated back to September, but the reality is, I don't think it is a true figure at the moment, because we've got to wait until, as you say, all the grants are come in and actually what we're actually going to get from the Welsh Government having put in the competitive tendering. There is something, if Adam could possibly join in 3.4, action taken including working through existing plans to accelerate delivery bases. That list of issues there, I think, is incredibly important for the ongoing of this the scrutiny of our finance and performance. And I think some of the issues there we will have to have a deeper look at. And I think one of them is the commissioning reviews, because I think we need to go back and see what effect they have actually had on us. The commercialisation, which at the moment, I think, as you have rightly said, our commercial activity has been so curtailed by COVID-19. I think that's an issue that, need to talk to Chris Williams about. I think those two issues are incredibly important, and the implementation of the social services saving plan. I understand that actually, considering the overspend that we've had, those are issues. I think those issues there, and if I respond, because all of them come back to the bottom paragraph, and that is the future steps, and the action plan for taking us out of COVID-19. And I think those are the issues that are actually going to be very, very effective in the future. And I think, Adam, would you like to pass comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll take them in order. Certainly the commercialisation and procurement savings. Obviously, procurement continues, some of that work, even during COVID, we're still procuring. Obviously, in terms of the income, as I think Ben's already said, in terms of we're not getting the income streams that we had, things aren't available, so we haven't been able to progress certainly the use of the commercial team in that way, but they have been directed into other areas in terms of supporting COVID and making sure that we continue to get the best deals that we can through contracts that have been renewed. Happy to look at further information in relation to that as we progress, and obviously it will be reviewed under the recovery plan, the final point, as we move into this next second phase of the recovery plan. That's all part of what we need to look at moving forward. In terms of the social services review, obviously their time, although has been looking to support the COVID, that reshaping has continued with the appointments of the new heads of service, and that continues to be looked at in terms of how they progress. And I know he's subject to other scrutinies in terms of overseeing that, and also through the area planning board. So again, that work hasn't ceased and will continue to be undertaken in terms of how that realigns itself. And again, in this second phase of the recovery plan, led by Dave Howes, there is a focus in there which will be channeled through the regional board in terms of making sure that reorganisation, reprioritisation and redevelopment of social services continues on a regional footprint. I think that picks up the three.
Yeah, I think the issue will be at some stage the whole plan, because we cover the performance of the council. I think we will need to have that discussion at some time in the future about how we are going to implement the performance data work within that within that recovery plan.
Yeah, totally agree, Chair. I think now that we're starting to enter that second phase, so the recovery part, obviously we're still underway, it does cross over. We're not out of that initial phase of COVID, so we are still aligning ourselves. As you know, we've just come out of fire break today, so that continues. And as we move into the second phase, I think that'd be right and just to review where we are going with that second phase of that remobilisation and into the reshaping element of the council. So I think you may just need to give us a few months in order to get well underway on that, in order to be able to have something meaningful we can bring back.
Yeah, I understand that, Adam, but I do think that I would think by February we should have some sort of indication about the performance of that plan.
Yeah, I certainly hope so by then, Chair.
Okay. Right, if there's no other questions on this element, but I noticed the next item on the agenda is the further feedback on the medium-term budget statement. Is there anything else you can actually add to what has already been said, Ben? Because there's a review of the revenue reserves. We've had that, haven't we?
But very briefly on that review of revenue reserves, yes, you had it at council last week. I don't think there's anything particularly to add on that. I mean, given we've had a very good session on the first quarter report, the reality is it's a legal obligation. It would have been a very boring technical report with no movement in reserves if it hadn't been for COVID. The reality is the two lumps of money that I've asked council, and council did agree to release, are entirely to address COVID. I suppose the only other bit to emphasise, which is set out in the report, is the general fund reserves remain at the minimum level that I felt were ever safe to hold. And I think COVID has proven that to be the case. If we didn't have those earmarked reserves to go after, which I made clear to council I'd have preferred not to have to release, I'm anticipating as a result of the first quarter that I'm at least £10 million short. There wasn't £10 million in general fund reserves. So to some extent, you have no option as a council but to release earmarked reserves. But it does lend credence to the advice which I've been consistent over the last 3 years of saying general reserves are the lowest they can be. I didn't expect them to be tested by this black swan event, but they've proven that they are indeed at the lowest they could be. But thankfully, the authority did have substantial amounts of earmarked reserves, which should, of course, be used for the earmarked purpose in normal circumstances, but in extremis, I've had to recommend. So I don't think there's anything particularly to add other than that on the report. So unless there are any questions specifically on it, I'm happy to go on to the midterm statement, but I will pause there just in case there were any technical questions on the results.
I've got Peter Jones and Peter Black. So Peter Jones first and then Peter Black.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question, if it is a question, is reference to paragraph 3.8 in the report, where the section 151 officer, i.e. Ben, is commenting that, I'll read it out. I mean, the council needs to continue to prepare for significant change in service delivery that will inevitably impact on direct employment levels going forward. Now, that's a very serious statement, but almost innocently presented in the report. I'm sure it's absolutely true. I mean, we've been discussing the overall situation and we understand where that statement is coming from. The comment to prepare for significant change in service delivery, I just wonder whether Ben has any notion of what that might entail and whether he'd be willing to comment on that. Thank you.
Can I interrupt there? I think it was in the recovery plan that Adam, there was a line in that said the same thing. And other than for Ben to pass comment on there, Adam, would you like to answer comment on that? Because it is a personnel matter as opposed to a finance matter.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. Certainly in the recovery plan, I mean, looking forward, we have challenges moving ahead within the council. And it's really just saying that, you know, there will be moves up and down across the council depending on where it needs to go. And what we can't do at the moment is preempt any of the reviews that are being undertaken. So whether that be social services that may need more staff in order to support the service that we have, if we have to open up new units, if we have to get additional cover. So we have to have a look at both sides of the coin. This isn't just a downward number, it could be an upward number. The reality is that the council is going to have, as we already knew through the medium-term financial plan, that there are going to be challenges ahead, and so it would be wrong not to already start to flag up that there may be changes in personnel as we look to the future. At the moment, I can't say exactly what number that will be until the reviews have been undertaken.
Peter, would you like to come back on that?
No, that's okay. Thank you, Chair. Okay,
Peter Black.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to refer to the table in 3.12, which is the earmarked reserves. There are, as Ben has already indicated, there are two major reductions in there, which is the effective wiping out of the contingency fund and the £10 million taken from the equalisation reserves. So in a sense, my question is two parts. First of all, does that mean we no longer have a contingency for the rest of this financial year? And the second part, in terms of the equalisation reserves, that money, as I understood it, was there to meet the revenue costs of the City Deal capital expenditure. Are we anticipating that full £10 million being recovered, or is that going to be a permanent loss on that particular reserve?
Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the contingency one is interesting. So many years ago, we used to have a contingency sum on the balance sheet and also budget for an in-year contingency. My predecessors long since robbed everything that was on the balance sheet until we got to 1920. So for many, many years, we've run only with the in-year contingency sum. We were in the fortunate position at the end of 1920 to be able to put that 6.3 million back onto the balance sheet for contingency. So in one sense, I'd have liked it to have sat there for longer. As I say, if it wasn't for COVID, my review would have concluded keep it there for a future year. But because we put it in as a result of 1920, and given the sheer scale of draw needed, I've had no choice but to recommend you draw it out in full. So there is now back to no brought forward sums on balance sheet in contingency. So the only sum available you have is what is set as the in-year contingency sum. That's about £3.5 million, just shy of in terms of the budget as set. In terms of the first quarter, you've seen that not only have I had to recommend that you take that 6.3 million, but I have committed also the whole of the in-year contingency. So there is no contingency left in the current year. However, the base budget is set with an in-year setting of contingency of around that £3.5 million mark. So brought forward sums, yes, absolutely gone, but there is base budget provision for around £3.5 million of contingency. And I am likely to continue to recommend to council when it comes to budget setting that that's the order of magnitude that it is the minimum it should be. I think that's proven to be the case in terms of where we are in the current year. It's a bit like the debate with the level of general reserves. In terms of the capital equalisation reserve, Councillor Black is absolutely right, and it goes back to the point I made. You've had consistent advice from me for the last 3 years, which is decisions that have been made are that capital financing costs will peak in 25-26, and we've had the very short-term gains as a result of capital slippage, very fortuitous dealings in terms of interest rates, plus the MRP review, which has enabled me to, at a technical level, squirrel away nearly £22 million into that capital equalisation reserve. And it is clear from an officer point of view that the ideal thing to do would have been to have held on to that and to distribute it all the way through to 25-26. It is undoubtedly the case that if the sum is drawn, there is less available in the medium term to enable you to get to that glide path to 25-26. At this point in time, my position is that I do need to recommend that the £10 million is drawn, and we will continue to see where we get to with Welsh Government. I do not expect us to be reimbursed for the lot, and that therefore there will be a draw from the Capital Equalisation Reserve in this year. I hope it's lower than the £10 million sum, but if it is a draw from the Capital Equalisation Reserve, then there is clearly less available to assist council getting to 25-26. And that goes to the heart of probably when we ultimately get on to the next item, which is the midterm budget statement. And I alluded to it in my verbal report to council, which is officers and members do have very, very difficult choices. We have to have an eye to the medium term. We have to have an eye to the very long term in terms of our obligations under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I'm thinking also in terms of the Environment Act and a whole raft of other things that are the right things to do around climate change, etc., etc. But there is no point having funds available in the future if you can't survive the here and now. And there are going to be some real difficult choices to be made by this council, every other council, as you see with government, UK government, Welsh government and governments around the world, where you've had to have unprecedented levels of spending and intervention, which I think most commentators, if not all commentators, think is the right thing to do. But money doesn't come out of fresh air. It will have to be paid for at some point in time. So it's right that you asked that question, Councillor Black. And clearly the reason for the wording I've chosen in the first quarter report, where I'm exhorting officers and members to rein in spend wherever possible. In a normal year, it would be rebalance the books immediately, please, because then there's no risk of draw from reserves. That was an unrealistic ask. So I've put a cap on it in terms of my professional advice, and Cabinet, through agreeing my report at the first quarter, and council in terms of agreeing my reserves report, has endorsed that as the cap, as it were, to work with. But clearly any amount we don't spend in year, any amount whether we don't fail to recover from Welsh Government, can only improve the position. But you are right to make the point that it does impact upon the glide path to 25-26, a glide path that we can't really change. The capital programme is pretty much cemented in now in full, and the capital financing costs will come. But that'll be a decision for future budgets. I've got to survive the here and now. So I'm making an officer trade-off, and ultimately it'll be a member trade-off. And you'll have to, when it comes to council in terms of receiving the budget and the medium-term financial plan, weigh up the risks and the challenges between the immediacy of the situation, the medium term and the longer term.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? No? Then can we go on to the medium-term budget statement? If you've got anything else to say, that is, Ben?
I don't think I've got anything particularly to say. I recognise this is a particularly difficult one, and it's relatively fresh in your mind from what I said last week at council. It's very difficult for you to scrutinise and review a report that's not in front of you because it was only a verbal report. But I'm more than happy to entertain questions if there are any as a result of what I said in council last week. As you heard when I prefaced it at the beginning, I was deliberately pithy in my initial opening remarks to make the point, you know, going beyond what would not be normal for the statutory officer in terms of being entirely ambivalent about the politics of the matter. But the reality is COVID is so big and the consequences so big at a macroeconomic level that I felt it necessary to say it's going to be really, really difficult for me to give you clear professional officer advice as to what is the right thing to do. I will endeavour to give my best advice as I see it, and I'm sure Cabinet and Council and councillors will endeavour to give their best advice and make the best decisions they can at the point in time. But by goodness, this authority, like every authority, like governments around the world, have got some really, really difficult choices between what you're doing in the here and now, the medium term. And let's be honest, none of that money that's being spent comes from fresh air. There will have to be a rebalancing at some point in the future. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions if there are any, but I wouldn't otherwise profess to talk again to a report that's not unfortunately in front of you, because there's nothing to talk about because everything's been delayed.
Are there any comments or questions? Well, the one thing I would like to say is, Ben, thank you very much for being your honest report that went to council and cabinet, and to come here today and give us the bleakest of bleakest outcomes. But you are honest about the fact that we will have to have draws in the future, and there will have to be some very difficult decisions to be made by the executive, and we as a scrutiny will have to examine what those decisions are and how it's going to affect the people of Swansea. So again, thank you very much, and I thank Ben for also for his answers with regards to the future employment, the future structure of council, because I think they both go together. I think the future finances and the future structure and the delivery and the performance of that plan, both those items go together, and I think it's incredibly we address those problems as soon as we can. And again, thank the pair of you for your reports. Can I, with council's with the committee's approval, go on now to look at the recycling and landfill annual performance report? Mark first, I would have thought, and then Chris.
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you very much, and thank you, Scrutiny, for inviting us along here today to talk about this report. I mean, first of all, I mean, obviously the report is last year. It's up till April of this year, so it's reflecting on our performance last year, but it does touch in the report as well on this year. So that invites me into, I mean, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to address Scrutiny and anybody else who's listening in today without commenting on the fact of what's happened this year. I'm not going to go through all the COVID thing. We're all fully aware of the impact on COVID on all of us, on society, on staff, etc. But I have to pay tribute wholeheartedly to the staff and management of the waste recycling service throughout this pandemic. And I know you all share, and I know many of you have sent comments into me, to the department, to the staff, and the public out there have been terrific in supporting the efforts of our staff. And it would be amiss of me, because I'm going to touch on a bit on this year's performance. We wouldn't be anywhere near where we are now had it not been for the good work, determination and effort of working throughout, not missing a day, of our collection services at the curbside. And I know you all know this, and I'm sure you all agree with me on and want to pass those best wishes on. And also, as well as, you know, the public. again, as I said, I'll comment later on this year's performance to date. But again, none of that would be achievable without crews collecting, and none of it would be achievable without the public maintaining their impetus and effort in continuing to do the recycling. And there are many reasons why people may not have wanted to put the same effort in, how much of a distraction in their daily lives COVID has been. But in fairness, what you'll see later in the report is any negative impact on our collection services and the amount of recyclables we collected is purely down to the impact on COVID structurally and not what people are putting in their curbside waste. So that effort has maintained without a blip, and for that, again, I'm eternally grateful to all our residents of Swansea. So just moving on from that then, Chair, as I go through the report, paragraph 1.3, I'll just highlight some of them. I don't intend to go through the full report, but obviously I can be asked questions once I finish, or Chris can come in and comment if there's anything I've missed that he wants to pick up on. Looking at the end of March, we did achieve our 64% target. Now that was an increase of 2.1, and again, that was due to the introduction of the Keep It Out campaign. Mostly, it was predominantly that increase was. So had we not introduced that campaign, and I will say it wasn't just about increasing targets and achieving targets. That obviously was a major driver in us wanting to introduce it and implement it. But the net effect has been there's been well over 2,000 tonnes a year on year of waste going to landfill as a result of that. So that is massive. 2,000 tonnes or more would have gone into Tir John landfill site. That didn't, because we used the Keep It Out campaign. So as well as helping us as an authority reach our targets, avoid fines, etc., that is monumental. That is staggering, and that is to be well, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic result. So that I'm very, very proud of. When you go on to 1.4, it talks about where that performance puts us in the All Wales listing. It puts us mid-table almost, in about 13th position. But I must, it does say in the report there that these are tables that are based on the amount of recycling achieved. Now, as we are almost totally a landfill site authority, one of the only ones in Wales that send all their waste to landfill, we actually lose out on the recycling rate as a result of that. All other authorities send some, most or all of their landfill waste for incineration, energy from waste. The result of that is, if we were doing that, we would be able to claim a 6% recycling rate from the bottom ash that comes out of energy from waste. So that would put our current level, or the last year's level, had we been using energy from waste, we'd be up near the 70% now, which would put us very much in the top quartile, near the top of performance. So it's not a true reflection. It's the way it is, but it's not a true reflection of where we are. We are a very good performing authority when compared equally with all other authorities. Again, it talks there in 1.5 about we send the bulk of our residual waste to landfill. As we know, that is due to come to an end in the end of January 2022. And we are looking at what the impact of that is going to be, because we have to find alternative methods to landfill. So currently our strategy is to exit Tir John. That's the declared situation we're in at the moment at the end of January 22. And we are busily looking for alternative disposal methods as we speak. Those haven't been confirmed, despite I know in Council last year, I did say that I was hopeful to have been in a position now to be able to say what our alternative disposal methods are. That hasn't been arranged or agreed yet. We are currently looking at options, and but that will obviously have to come back and get Cabinet and Council approval, well, Cabinet approval anyway. But so that's something we are currently working on. But I can say it'll looking at what's available at the moment, it will be some sort of energy from waste disposal method. I think in the report last year we talked about a regional solution to this. That is no longer on the table. We are now looking at disposal methods for energy from waste as a sole authority. So we have to look at ways of disposing of our waste. That'll be done through existing market availability. There was potential on a regional basis to look at maybe building a facility to supply the waste for the region. That is no longer on the cards. So we will be looking to utilise existing market availability for our residual waste. If I go on then to, obviously we're aware that if we do miss targets, the critical need of these targets, and Councillor Jones raised the question earlier on. I'm trying to look if it's in, is it 1.7? Based on current recycling, 1.8. I'm trying to see, Councillor Jones, this situation, yeah, it's 1.8. This situation affecting all council ways is fully understood by who have advised that they will be taking the pandemic into account. So on the basis that we are likely to be close or even a slight shortfall, we may not achieve the 64% target this year, but we can attribute any misses purely down to the impact of COVID. Okay. And, you know, as our sites, recycling centres were closed for 2 months, our nappy recycling was suspended, our bulky waste collection was suspended. Those alone have been the difference in us being able to achieve our targets, because we'd have been confident otherwise of reaching our 64%. So we can certainly attribute, and again, this is just projecting. We don't know yet if we won't reach the 64, but we could fall short. It won't be massively short, but it'll be within the realms of what we can explain to Welsh Government. And as a result, we are certainly not expecting that we will be affected by any fines. Again, looking at the report, Chair, again, we talk about the Keep It Out campaign, how vital that has been in achieving that, and we are continuing with that. We are, you know, our teams are out making sure that people are keeping to the rules of it. And as I said, it's not just about meeting targets. It's because it's the right thing to do. There is no need to put food, I mean, particularly food waste. It's such an easy thing to divert that into the separate containers. It shouldn't be in with the black bags. Apart from anything else, it causes disturbance and disquiet in communities where bags, if they've got food in, are ripped open. There's you know, dogs, cats and seagulls attack the bags. There's no food in them. There's nothing there for the animals to enter into them and rip them open. So it has benefits of helping us reach our targets. It is absolutely the right thing to do, and it stops all these black bags being torn open around, which are a blight on in our communities. I think I will stop there now, Chair. As I said, I wanted to get across the important points, and obviously I'm happy to take questions. I don't know if Chris wants to add anything to it. Chris, do you want to say anything?
Nothing from me, Chair, to add to Mark's summary.
Okay, I have 4 people have indicated to speak. Peter Black first, then Peter Jones. Peter Black.
I took my hand down because Mark actually answered my question, but just on another question, are you anticipating restarting the receipt of black bags at the Llansamlet recycling centre this financial year, Mark?
Yes, is the answer to that. The delay has been obviously because of COVID, Peter, but also we have, as you're aware, the sites have reopened today, all of our sites. But today has been the start of the booking system at Llansamlet. So we wanted to get that underway and get a couple of weeks of experience in how that works to make sure that, and then we will be looking, it will definitely be introducing black bags in this financial year, certainly well before the end of this financial year as well. But okay. Sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
Okay. Peter Jones, Councillor Peter Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I join the Joneses. My comments with reference to paragraph 1.4 in particular, which concerns incineration for residual waste management and for energy from waste. This is a difficult issue, it seems to me. On the one hand, I'm sure we will all welcome the use of waste for energy generation. This is a kind of no-brainer in terms of policy, in terms of making best use of waste that can't otherwise be disposed of. The problem actually isn't mentioned in this report, the impact on climate change policy. Because I've been reading a couple of reports from German academic sources that have been looking at the CO2 emissions in particular from waste incineration. They are significant and they are growing. I mean, CO2 emissions have doubled over the last 10 years across the European Union, including presumably UK when we were members. And clearly this is a concern because we have a balance here. On the one hand, we want to find substitutes for fossil fuel use for energy generation. On the other hand, we have climate change targets to meet. And if we move increasingly away from landfill into incineration, whilst that's understandable on one level in terms of waste management, it's a negative in terms of our climate change targets, and in particular trying to meet a net zero emission by 2030, for example, which this council is targeting for itself. And obviously there are other issues with incineration too, relating to air pollution, the impact on air quality, the impact potentially on human health as a result of incineration pollution. So there are negatives in that area as well. So I'm not challenging the policy at the moment, but I am saying that I think that the paper and our thinking need to be made aware of this very negative impact of moving away from landfill towards incineration. I mean, once we start incinerating what previously we've been infilling into land settlement, clearly our contribution to carbon emissions and hence a negative impact on our climate change targets is going to rise. And so I think we need to be aware of that. And I don't know whether either Mark or Chris or anyone else would like to comment on that. Thank you, Chair.
I would have thought, Chris, would like to pass comment on it? As it's a technical question more than anything else, is it, Mark?
Well, if I could first, I mean, Chris can answer on the technical side, but yeah, no, it is very much a political view on it as well, and I absolutely agree with everything Councillor Jones said. It is between the devil and the deep blue sea to a certain extent, because I think everybody will agree that continual landfill is not a long-term option. It's not for all of the well-known disadvantages of landfill. It is something we need to move away from. The problem we've got as an authority at the moment, or within Wales, I mean, currently all other 20 authorities are using energy from waste incineration facilities. We are the only ones who are not at any scale. So this is why we have taken into account. So whilst needing to move away from landfill, the only available options we've got currently in front of us, realistic workable options today, are energy from waste. Now, when I said earlier on that officers are out looking at what are the possible contracts we could enter into, what are the arrangements for that sort of thing, there are various timescales arranged around contracts. You can get 25-year contracts, for example, to enter into for incineration. We are absolutely not doing that. We are aware that there are constantly new technologies being developed in this field all the time. The problem is they are not available to us at this moment in time. So what we're looking at, and I'm sure Chris will give more detail on this, is as short a possible term of contract for energy from waste as we can manage. So, for example, probably a minimum term, and I may not be exact on this, Chris might have the details, is probably about 3 years. So we are looking at introducing a contract to dispose of our waste for as little a time as we can be tied to, so that gives us time to look at the constantly changing market and methods that may well come on stream that are less damaging to air pollution, give off less CO2 and all the concerns that Councillor Jones raised. And then we will be in a position to switch to those should and when they come on stream, as opposed to tying ourselves into a long-term contract, which wouldn't allow us to pick up on these new technologies. So we're very much aware of it. We are sensitive to, you know, the views of the public about energy from waste. But at this moment, and as we speak today, we've got two choices of continued landfill or energy from waste, and neither of them are necessarily the best solutions for the environment. Chris, I don't know if you...
Chris?
Yeah, what a good question. And the technicalities of it certainly exceeds my knowledge in this area. What I can say is that the circular economy or move towards circular economy strategy by Welsh Government is certainly where we need to be going, with the ultimate aim of there not being any waste, because the vast majority of carbon emissions are not from waste disposal. They're from the production of the materials in the first place. Sure. So what we need to be doing is minimizing the products that we use, improving our repair, our reuse. You know, recycling itself should be is low down the hierarchy, as it should be, and then recovery, which energy from waste, is below that again. So first of all, you know, the long-term strategies need to be about repair, reuse, and stop making things, so then we don't have to dispose of them. And then when you come back to where we are now, you know, landfilling gives off methane gas. We capture as much as we can, but that has adverse impacts on the atmosphere. Energy from waste is the Welsh Government preferred solution. It's in their national blueprint and has been now for many years. But it is what's considered to be the best of I guess a bad lot of having to dispose of this waste. When you're looking at the emissions from energy from waste, you know, I've been to the energy from waste plant in Cardiff, and only about a quarter of it is the burning and energy production. About 3/4 is cleaning of the air afterwards. So a huge effort goes into reducing emissions, and certainly in places like Sweden, you know, they have their energy waste plants in the middle of cities, and you know, they have been doing this for many years. But not to say that it doesn't come with its benefits. Undoubtedly, it does. And the other thing to obviously bear in mind is that when you're producing energy from waste, any emissions that are produced, you can also offset against the fact that that energy you're creating otherwise potentially would be created by the burning of other fossil fuels, which will also have the emissions. But you know, my understanding is that energy from waste plants are not as efficient as some of your sort of, I suppose, pure fossil fuel power plants. So it is a really tricky one. Mark's quite right. You know, we are currently looking at the best balance to find something which is available, is affordable, and gives us the flexibility to move with emerging technologies. So we are looking at the moment for a 3-year contract with extensions up to 7 on an annual basis, which will give us that flexibility. And I'm sure new technology will, you know, there's a technology called gasification, which we do keep getting approaches on. But there's, I don't think in this country there are any commercial operations up and running where gasification, instead of burning waste, what they call cooks waste. So it releases the gases from it, and instead of releasing the gases as emissions, it uses the gases to drive turbines. Again, we're getting into technical areas which is, you know, I don't have the detailed knowledge of. So in summary, it is a balance. Preferred option and has been for many years, but we are looking at a solution which will allow us the good balance of being an affordable, available solution with flexibility to move into better technologies if and when they become available.
Okay. Peter, do you want to come back on it or anything?
I'll just quickly come back. First of all, to thank Mark and Chris for the very helpful, detailed and informative responses. And of course, excuse me, and also to a recognition of the nature of the problem, which clearly is, as Chris says, tricky. wicked problem, if you like. But somehow, I think the essential thing is to recognise that it is part of it's a problem that's built into the solution. And I think we need to recognise that and be aware of it. Chris is right that the long-term solution is with the development of what is called a circular economy. And this is something I've been looking at and working on for a number of years. But we ain't there yet by a long way, of course. And I'm not very optimistic about technological alternatives at the moment to incineration once we move to incineration and away from landfill. So it will be a continuing problem. We need to know what the impact will be of moving from landfill to incineration. If it's okay with you, Chair, I'd be very interested in talking to Chris away from this meeting to have a one-to-one discussion, if that's okay with you, Chris, about the nature of the problem and solutions and what they might be. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, I have 3 other individuals. Councillor, sorry. Councillor Phil Downing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Funny enough, my first question was to remind the Cabinet member that the last time he came in front of us, I think I asked the question about the life of Tir John and where do we go from there. And he did say at the beginning that he was going to announce something within the next 12 months or so, but things are moving so fast. He's answered that question, so I don't need to answer it again. But there is a concern because when we spoke about this last time, we said the life of Tir John was in 2022, which was maybe 3 years ago. Now we're down to around 18 months. So this is shortly coming to us where Tir John will not be used. So it's getting more and more important. 2 other small questions. Are we still going round kicking black bags and explaining to people that they put in the wrong stuff into black bags? And my last question is on the finance. Are we envisaging a shortfall in the income of this area, which was, I think it's the last paragraph, 19.8 million, knowing that the recycle shop is closed, and do you envisage any other shortfalls?
Mark, do you want to answer the first question?
Yeah, certainly I did mention earlier on about I did say last year that I was hopeful to be in a position this year to announce our alternative, but that's still in. I mean, COVID hasn't helped with that, obviously. That's delayed things because officers have been busy running the business without having the time really to look at alternative. But, that is ongoing. It certainly will be something we will have planned and put in place well in advance of the planned closure of Tir John on the end of January 2022. Certainly on the commercial side of it, Chris can answer more in detail, but the big losses we would suffer financially would be commercial collections, which are clearly down as a result of a lot of businesses not operating. I haven't got the detail. Chris would probably shed a bit more light on that. I'm sorry, Councillor Downing, I missed the second question.
I think the second questions are all for Chris, to be honest.
Oh, right, okay, thank you.
Chris?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, coming to the Keep It Out campaign first, as in the report, that was extremely successful when it was kicked off. Unfortunately, through the pandemic, we've had to effectively pause it. It would have been inappropriate knocking on people's doors and exposing staff and the public to that level of interaction. We were just tying it into a new waste traineeship, which we again had to delay because of COVID, but we started in September, and the intention that the Keep It Out campaign then would be sort of reinvigorated using the trainees as a fundamental part of their traineeship. Since then, we've gone into a local lockdown first of all, and then obviously a fire break. So it's something we haven't been able to restart yet, but absolutely the intention is to excuse the pun, but kickstart that again, because it is essential, and it's these initiatives which help us with the energy from waste solution problem, or at least mitigates it, because we need to focus higher up the hierarchy, and obviously the Keep It Out campaign is part of that as well. In terms of financial loss, yes, the area has been hit significantly by COVID. As Mark quite rightly said, through the first lockdown, probably 90% of our business closed, so we're no longer required a service from us. And the reuse shop, which has a significant income, whilst the income matches the costs, we lost the income, didn't lose the costs. But all of that has been wrapped up and forwarded to Ben and submitted as part of the claim to Welsh Government as the impact on COVID, because business closing was a direct result of Welsh Government telling them they had to. So, so they've been put forward as a claim. The value of recyclables continues to be volatile, and it's up and down all over the place. So, that is something that we need to live with, and we keep flagging up when there are issues. But so far as a department, we've been able to absorb it as a wider place department. So that's kind of where we are financially.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, Chris has just perhaps answered part of my question. I think to our residents, recycling means that, when they recycle in their house and they put it on the doorstep, but the chain actually goes on to end up with the, shall we say, the finished product, how it's disposed of and so on. With the market, I know, Chris, you actually mentioned about, prices are all over the place at the present time and so on, and I think it's a buyer's market as such. But we've all seen how, shall we say, certain authorities, I'm not saying Swansea and so on, actually disposed of items in the past, ended up in the Philippines or whatever. Are all our contracts compliant with regards to how they dispose of everything at the end? And also as well, I know Peter Jones actually mentioned the circular economy. I don't even know if that's going to come in my lifetime, or shall we say our lifetime and so on. Are we actually involved in that sort of process as well with these suppliers or with our contracts?
Okay, Jeff. Chris?
Yeah, certainly with regards to disposal of recyclates, every outlet that we utilise are fully registered with the UK regulators. That doesn't necessarily mean that some products aren't shipped abroad, and sometimes that is quite right to do so. I believe our glass used to go to Portugal. That's where they make a lot of bottles for their wine and what have you, and then ship it back to the UK for us to consume. Sometimes we use UK brokers who might have various outlets. So it would depend on the product and on the time, but the vast majority of our recyclates go to UK-based processors who actually then use the material into the final product within the UK, and that's for the vast majority of our materials. And in terms of the circular economy, yeah, obviously the circular economy is happening now, but as Peter alluded to it earlier, it's still in its infancy, and that really needs total sort of national, UK-wide and worldwide governments to buy into it, because you need to have the demand for those products for you to be able to supply the materials for that circular economy. It is probably one of the key in this industry. It's the key driver for Welsh Government now. All their funding is going towards circular economy projects, but we are a relatively small country, and I think when you're looking for a circular economy within a country of Wales, which is quite right to do because it brings with it employment and it keeps the resources within the country, but we are quite a small country to achieve that on a very large scale. And I think it needs to be done on a wider geographical area to be able to achieve it. All our paper and card, that goes into England to be processed because there isn't a process in Wales at all. and I'm not sure it's necessarily wise to be making huge investments to have it in Wales if it's available in the UK. But then on smaller scale products, I know I'm working with the Welsh Government at the moment, where they're actually looking at procuring technology to recycle adult hygiene products within Wales. So that's your nappies, both sort of child and adult. And that would be pretty much a first. We have one recycling outlet in Wales at the moment, but this would be looked to build 2 more plants, which would ensure that all AHP products created or used in Wales would then be recycled in Wales. So that's a real positive thing. And the Welsh Government are looking at a wood recycling facility in Blaenau Gwent, I think it is, working in partnership with the local authority there, with the view to that becoming a hub for all South Wales. So that's where the Welsh Government wants to go. And they are very keen on things like repair cafes. They've just put out a grant offer now across Wales, £30 million, which is specifically focused on repair and reuse. It is difficult because that money needs to be bid for within the next 2.5 weeks, has to be spent by end of March. But that's what Welsh Government focus is, so which is good. But it's about we can seek to make things from recycled products. They have to force people to sell things that are made from recycled products and restrict the sale of things which don't use recycled products. And so it's it does need that wide approach.
Okay. Sorry, can I just expand on one thing? With these suppliers we've got, I assume they are preferred suppliers, actually identified by the Welsh Government. Who actually checks that they go through the proper channels to dispose of the items at the end of the day? We don't seem to actually do that with our procurement or with yourselves. So who verifies the process that actually the items go through at the end of the day?
Any companies who can accept waste within Wales, the NRW is a regulator, and across the bridge in England, it would be the Environment Agency. So they are the regulating bodies to keep a check on their flow of waste and their compliance to their license and permits.
Thank you.
Okay, Paxton.
Sorry, Chairman, I take my hand down. To be honest, the question had been answered.
Okay, thank you very much. Only a couple of comments, really. One about the role of NRW within the waste disposal right across the board. From they are, let's be blunt about it, quite poor in the way in which they react to things and the way in which they actually cooperate with local authorities, and right across the board, not just in Swansea. The reaction across Wales is the same in all local authorities. They are quite poor in what they're doing, and I think there is pressure from the WLGA to see that the NRW is made more accountable, because at the moment it's not. The minister is in many cases just not answering the questions that are put to them about the way in which they treat right across the board, from wood burning to just to scrapyards to disposal of illegal waste, etc. The one thing, couple of things first, about the repair cafes, Chris. I know that I've talked to you in the past about some companies wish to engage with us about purchasing white goods in particular. Has there been any process, any advancement on that? And Mark, on the energy from waste, which seems to have been going on for the last 20 years, that we've been engaged with regional and various other authorities. I know that it's a very, very difficult question, and I know that we've moved away from the regional issue, but is it, we say the end of January 2020 is when we've got to finish using Sir John. Can you give us a better idea about when, give us an idea that when this contract is ready, that we can, as scrutiny boards, we can have a look at the contract to see what benefits it will give to the people of Swansea. And finally, the issue about the review of commercial waste services, I think that's something as well that when I spoke to Chris Williams about our commercial activity, he was very keen to have a look at that as well. So Chris, I don't know if you were working with Chris Williams on this, or is it an issue just for waste or for commercialisation? Thank you.
On a point of order, Chair, can I raise the point of order?
Certainly does.
Surely this is a question of policy development, not scrutiny. We should be scrutinising the current system of working and the effects of working. I sat here biting my tongue whilst...
No, you carry on.
Following Peter's original question, but it's all about policy development.
Not particularly, as it does when you think about it. We are scrutinising what we are doing currently, and we are being told what the current position is, and that position is that we are going to run out the landfill. I assume that's the one you're talking about anyway.
Yeah,
and that question, no, hang on a second, Des. We asked about this 18 months ago, as Councillor Phil Downing brought up earlier on. So I don't think we're on about policy development. We know very well what the policy is, and that policy is something that the Welsh Government has set up. Yes, we do, Des. They're on about energy to waste. It's been around for about, as I said, 20 years. So I don't think it's a question of developing policy. The policy's there. What we want to know is what the actions are going to be currently to bring that about. But I do take your point, and that the issue isn't about development of policy. I got okay, Des. Yeah. I got Peter Black. Do you want to say something, or can I go straight on to Chris?
I just wanted to make the point on that this goes to the heart of what I've been saying for some time. You cannot separate policy development from scrutiny, because the two go hand in hand. You're scrutinising what's going on, at the same time you're developing answers to it. It's part of the whole same thing. And this idea that you can separate policy development from scrutiny is nonsense, as is evident from some of the policy committee agendas, which in my view is scrutiny. But we are where we are, and we'll do what we can with it.
Okay, can I? Paxton, you put your hand up now. Is it relevant to this?
Well, yes, of course, and it is, sorry, Chairman, it is certainly, but of course, this argument we've had over where the line is between scrutiny and PDCs, nobody's got any idea where it is, to be honest, and certainly they do move one into the other. It's, well, we've talked about it enough, and I don't really want to go down that route, but what Peter's saying is exactly right, of course.
Okay, can I then go back to Chris? Sorry, Chris, about the questions about the repair cafe and timescales and for the incineration of waste.
Yeah, at the moment the authority don't run any repair cafes, but within the authority area, I know the Environment Centre we're running a repair cafe, I think once a month, and I believe at one point I think it was in the Phoenix Centre in Town Hill where there was a repair cafe being run as well. But part of the, we potentially, in fact, I got a meeting with Repair Cafe Wales this afternoon to discuss a potential bid to have to expand the Repair Cafe infrastructure within the area of Swansea. And you mentioned about partnering with commercial sector and potentially the voluntary sector in terms of repair. And one avenue which I know you brought to me is about electrical repair of white goods, and again, I think that's something which we can progress with commercial sector rather than compete with them. Sometimes you can work with something which is already there rather than try and reinvent the wheel. So yes, so they're exactly the sort of things which the circular economy promotes, and that we are looking to push. Certainly, COVID hasn't helped any driving forward of new initiatives. It's been a firefighting situation now for the last 6, 7, 8 months. In terms of commercial waste customers, we can certainly work with Chris Williams' team on this. However, there is I suppose we would have a slightly different direction on it, and so working together is the best thing to do. Whereas I'm sure Chris's view would be that to maximise the income for the authority, whereas I'd also got half an eye on what impact that has on our recycling performance, because in the commercial waste sector, we potentially could gain a lot more income, but we could also reduce our recycling performance at the same time if that income is from the collection of non-recycled waste. So it's a bit of a balancing act from my side of things, as most of these things are. And then in terms of timing for Tia John, the current contract ends, I think it's 1st of February 2022. And we, now that we've kind of exhausted the regional approach, we now would be looking for a Swansea-centric approach. And instead of looking for a regional long-term contract, we're looking for, as Mark said earlier, a much shorter-term contract.
Okay.
And the time to put that contract together is now. We couldn't have done it a year ago, because you can't go to the market and say, what price will you give us in 2 years' time? So it has to be late enough so that they're pricing on something which is that they have a handle on in terms of what they can offer, and it can't be too late so that you can't run the procurement process in time for when Tia John closes. So we are literally just starting the documentation now, and it will run through currently a start date kind of 1st of Feb 22.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Is there any other questions or comments for either Chris or for Mark? If not, can I thank both of you for bringing the report and for your attendance and also your answers. Thank you very much indeed, both. Can we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the planned service improvement and the work programme? Okay. As I said, I'm sure everybody's read it. As you notice, there is a couple of things in there which we've put in. I've had a conversation with Richard Rowlands, and we are looking at bringing the reports that we bring for the performance monitoring in future. We will be bringing that. They will be issued to members hopefully a week prior to the meeting. So, but before that, actually, as soon as we can after they've gone for verification to Cabinet, so that everybody can have a more of a detailed look at it, so that we can then go back to Richard or back to the originating part of the council, so then we can ask questions, so we can hopefully have answers at the meetings that we have. We're hoping to do that from January. We think December might be a bit early to set up the process, but that's hopefully to do in future, so we have a better understanding of what the performance is, and then as you've got an understanding, we can then ask the questions prior to the meeting, so we can have some answers at the meeting, as opposed to having a delay on doing that. Then the other one is the commissioning reviews outcome, which is in January. The fourth item on the agenda. As you know, we originally used to do the commissioning reviews. What we haven't done is reviewed how they've worked and what's worked and what hasn't. So that's being done then. Obviously, the budget proposals are naturally going to be there in February, but I suspect we will actually do them again in March, because the timescales for this year's budget, as Ben has said earlier on, it could be very, very compressed. We're not quite sure. Ben wasn't absolutely positive that we would have an indicative budget prior to Christmas, so we might just have a briefest an outline, and then around about January to have a better understanding of what the likely budget is going to be. At the bottom of that, you see a review of bylaws to be added to the work program, date to be agreed. the problem with this is when we've seen this in the Scrutiny Programme Committee, I'm not quite sure if everybody's aware, but I know Des would be aware because Des was on West Glamorgan County Council, and the bylaws that we had then, which were incorporated in the Act, made Swansea, created the city and county of Swansea after the dissolution of West Glamorgan. The bylaws came with them, and some of those bylaws are quite unique, and I can remember actually going through them, and there's quite a considerable amount of them. So what I propose doing is actually getting a list of them and having a look through them, and then send out the most obvious ones that need to be looked at, and then send them out to committee, and then have a decision at one of the meetings. I'm not sure yet, probably around about March or April after the budget, to have a discussion about whether we want an in-depth look at them, because they are, dare I say, some really difficult ones to understand. And I see Des shaking his head there because he can remember the byways and the carriageways and the furious driving, and what was the one that really struck me was what you can pick up off a breach, and the argument, and a certain councillor from Gower lost his cool completely over that, so we won't go into that one. So that's the work programme. I don't know if anybody has any comments on that. It should be.
That's a can of worms, Chairman.
I completely realised that, Des, and that's why I said we'd have a look at it, because there's some quite entertaining things in there, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Then we come on to the letters. Okay. Let's have a look here. Now there we are. Letters. You see all the letters that have been sent. Are there any comments or questions regarding any of them? If not, then can I? Oh, there is the final item is the snapshot on sickness. Now, council committee asked for this some time ago. I don't know if anybody has any comments on it. Yeah, I think it's quite difficult to, say if there's anything in particular there. It's just, and of course we know in a very difficult position with COVID-19, it's going to be very, very difficult to actually have an idea of what the sickness level and these various things like social services. You just cannot put a figure on that at the moment without sort of a detailed explanation. So what I suggest is that they're there for information, and if anybody has any comments, that we look at it in some other time. Paxton, you've got your hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just to say, Chairman, I know Audit are looking at this. We've seen a number of series of figures. They've got to be read very carefully at this point in time as to what you take out to them. Peter will remember the last meeting, and Jeff probably, that we had, where some of the figures are at the moment quite misleading, but that's another story. But it is difficult at this point in time anyway, but certainly Audit is looking at it as well.
Okay. Jeff, did you want to say something?
You're just going to mirror what Paxton said, and I think the figures actually came up in social services, adult social services, which gave us a flavour across the country, which was good to see, actually. So,
okay. If that's the case, can I thank you all for attendance this morning and some of your comments and contributions. Thank you very much indeed, and I'll speak to you again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Michelle or Emily, can't see you on here now.